Hi, I'm Brad Power, and this is the Cancer Patient Lab. This is one of our weekly webinar sessions. We're honored to have with us today Mark Taylor, who is a real role model as a leader in dealing with his care, someone that we can all learn from in terms of his leadership and taking advantage of services and information to guide his own care and then helping others. He's currently in Portugal, but he'll explain more of that. Our traditional disclaimers are, first of all, of course, this is medical information. It's information to help you work with your medical team. It is not medical advice. This is information for you to take to your medical team to hopefully advance your knowledge and your care. And then the other disclaimer is we're an open organization, open source, open data, open information. And so this will all be made public. We will publish everything that gets said in a transcript and the recording. So if you're concerned about that, don't say anything, change your name, and turn off your camera. Otherwise, it will be used. Yeah, so just quickly, I got introduced to Mark because I really like the name Patient-Led Oncology. That's who we are. You know, we're the Cancer Patient Lab, and we're trying to help patients and navigate their cancer and learn. And so it seemed like just on the surface, Mark was very aligned with what we're doing. And then I dove into, and you can find his story on his website, Patient-Led Oncology, and you'll find out that he's really been active and really turning over every stone about treating his disease, and also elaborating on integrative oncology. So I'm sure, again, he'll go into that in some more depth. So I expect to get two things from this session that Mark will walk us through. One is his role as a very engaged and activated patient in managing his care. And second, I suspect we'll learn something about integrative oncology and what works and what doesn't in that sphere. Mark, we typically, you said you have some slides. We typically, have like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of introduction, and then we try to leave the lion's share of the time for discussion. You've got a very active group here with, I'm sure, a lot of questions. So, hopefully you'll just have a little bit to introduce, and then we can open it up.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a fair amount to introduce. So how do you want to play it?
Try to be as short as you can, and then go back to your slides if they come up in the conversation.
Okay, so, makes sense. So
yeah, do the executive summary, and then you can, everything else is in your hip pocket. You can call on them in response to questions.
And then, how long is typically the call?
Oh, 1 hour. So
okay, yeah, so I'll be synced. Yeah, that makes sense.
Target the hour.
Okay,
yeah.
So good to meet you all. My story is I spent most of my life in finance technology. I worked on bond trading systems. Fairly conventional career, background in maths and statistics, technology, program management. No real insight into alternative health. Started off as a skeptic, if I'm honest with you, as one of these kind of hard data-driven people I come across from the business world who kind of expect standard of care to work perfectly. And then during a period of my life, I had a very intense period where kind of everything came in line to cause me to have a burnout, which led to stomach pains that were undiagnosed, a kind of common story that happens in the pancreatic space. Lots of scans, some signs that the tail was kind of inflamed, led to an endoscopic ultrasound. They saw some lesions there. Biopsy was inconclusive, and with an inconclusive biopsy, they wouldn't do anything. And at the time, we were taking my blood samples. My tumor markers were slightly elevated. And then one of my friends actually happened to work in an integrative clinic and suggested I do a circulating tumor cell test. And I didn't believe it at the start, spent some time sort of researching it, and then jumped on it, and it came out positive. I then followed up with a company that was doing the CTC test, RGCC, and they did another test called ACGH, which can use probabilistic matching on the DNA give a view in terms of what the cancer was, and it came up with pancreatic adenocarcinoma. So I had lesions, I had elevated tumor markers, I had pains where my pancreas was, and I had pretty much good evidence to suggest I had early stage cancer, but the doctor wouldn't treat me. So because there was no confirmed biopsy, I was kind of left to fend for myself without conventional treatment. And I was pretty angry at the conventional system for that at the time, not understanding how it worked. So I was left to sort of find my own solutions, and I went out, started reading the typical books that everyone reads, Jane's book, Nash's book, Kelly Turner's book, and I just started reading more and more. And then I actually saw a surgeon who I was discussing potentially getting surgery with, and he said off the records, look, I've seen people get results in clinics in Mexico, you may want to consider integrative medicine. And that started me on a world tour, and I flew to Thailand, to Malaysia, to the US, the UK, Hong Kong. I went to clinics all around. I probably saw around 20 different doctors over my time in the 5 years. And the typical story would be like this. You may have had this if you've gone to these integrative clinics. You get sold a lot of stuff that's got very little evidence behind it. You get a huge bill attached to it, and then they rarely give you any patient referrals to say whether it's worked or not. You know, this was a repeating pattern I was getting. And likewise, even in the books I was reading, when I was looking for evidence, like real solid evidence on protocols to follow, I couldn't get any data. I had a background in technology and data and program management, so I thought, you know, this is going to be fairly easy to fix. So I created a Facebook group to kind of bring patients together to try and capture what they were doing and see if it worked. So I did, my first trial was 100 pancreatic and bile duct patients. That was the cancer I had, and it was also a pretty good one to start with because the average stage 4 pancreatic patient lives between 7 and 11 months. So you get a turnaround fairly quickly on what's working and what's not. So I spent 3 years looking at 100 patients and captured every single bit of detail from what protocol they were doing. So, you know, what supplements they're taking, what dosage, what time of day. And at the time, I was kind of hoping, like a lot of people do, that there was some magical substance out there that would have the answer, or some magical protocol that would have the answer. But what I found after about 3 years of studying the data is it wasn't so much the specifics that mattered, it was the general approach that made the big difference. There were some key things that stood out. This is where I will share the screen. So this is the sort of data I collected from a specific patient. She was a 5-year survivor of pancreatic cancer. And what it became a bit, the types of findings you had became a bit silly almost. There was a real correlation with those doing 30 things or more in terms of the exceptional responders. There was one pattern. And it seemed a bit silly saying that when I was meeting other patients, giving them their views of what I'd seen. And it was like, yeah, just those doing more who were doing better, you know, and more being like an anti-cancer supplement like cumin, or, you know, meditation or exercising, or a vitamin C IV. And it kept coming up. And as I got to understand how the cell worked, and resistance and things like that, it started making it sense to me that what actually is happening is a lot of these things have a minor impact on your potential to get a good response. And but by sort of increasing the number of things you were doing, which had anti-cancer effect, you were giving yourself, you know, a 1% improvement on survival at each thing you were doing, which makes sense when you start understanding the way pathways link to the supplements. When you do the analysis on off-label drugs or anti-cancer supplements, they'll typically relate to pathways that cause resistance from the chemo, which is a standard protocol for pancreatic cancer. There's FOLFIRINOX followed by gemcitabine. So you're kind of looking at a chemo extension plan.
Hey, Mark, this is kind of hard to read. I don't know if you can kind of zoom in there a little bit.
Yeah, I don't intend to kind of show you. like the detail of this. I don't know. Like, I just wanted to give you an idea of the data. There's not really. I just wanted to give you a flavor of like how much, you know, these are line items in a sheet that someone collected. I don't know whether there's not going to be much of these. I'll try and see if I can. Let's see, just say.
Or maybe you can send it out afterwards or something like that if you're
yeah.
comfortable with that.
I can give you a Zoom menu. I may as well do it now. So is that better?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So no, I mean, and there's not too much to gain from here more than just showing you. I mean, we gave people these tools that they put in the supplement, their dosing, what they did it with, what the anti-cancer pathways that were impacted. And then, so, I mean, these were the things we found that stood out. So large protocols, we call them the 30 plus. Early adoption of the protocols. So if people left it, if people didn't find out about integrative oncology until like they've already got resistance, it didn't work. So it seemed to be that a lot of these anti-cancer approaches that people talk about were really more prolonging the life of the primary treatment. Now, this is a specific pancreatic trial I ran. I think for prostate would probably be a bit different because you've got wait and watch as an option. And I think, you know, the dynamics are slightly different for prostate. But there was a massive correlation with those going to an experimental clinic early on. So we had 4 complete responses, which is very rare in pancreatic, for those that had bravery, effectively, to go and fly from their country to a top clinic. Places like Cleef, which is shut down. He spent his life studying immunotherapy, Veritas Clinic, there's doctors in Malaysia. They're typically in the unregulated areas where people would need to fly to and spend a fair amount of time. But if they did it early, we were seeing like 80% of the complete responses were people who'd left in their first line or prior to their first line of treatment. And we're getting to NED with pancreatic, which is incredibly rare. And other things that stood out, there was a clear correlation of people who really wanted to live, particularly mothers of young children. And you'd see the kind of determination in the patients. And, you know, this is very difficult with cancer. It's very evident. And every integrative doctor I speak to talks about the apparent impact of someone's emotions on their outcomes. And this is something I studied later on. And also, because the importance of staying on standard of care seems so important, those that limited the side effects of the high-dose chemo also did better. One of the main reasons people have to stop treatment in pancreatic cancer is because of the dose-limiting toxicities of the chemo. So those that managed that were doing better. And unfortunately, because of the number that went to these clinics, a lot of them did spend a lot of money. These clinics are expensive. So they were the kind of the main observations, and then what I did, I then wanted to hone in really on what those clinics were doing, and I myself was traveling around the world, seeing a lot of these clinics, and I came to realize when I'd seen these experimental doctors that because there's no standard training for these doctors, each one had trained in a new specific skill. So every doctor I spoke to had different knowledge, different treatments, different approaches. And every doctor I'd speak to would expand my knowledge. And after speaking to about 20 of them, I was like, wow, I started getting conversations with the doctors where, because of my previous conversations, I had knowledge they didn't have. So then what I did is a second study where I went out and through my group started speaking to patients going to these clinics. And I captured data about how much they were spending, you know, what was the experience like, what side effects, and then even down to the exact protocols where they would give me, you know, what treatments they're doing, what dosages if they could get it, and then I also captured like who was doing well here. So testing really important. Early on, starting the treatments early on in the treatment plan, very important. And then there was a realization that a lot of the clinics, probably more than 50%, had a very limited range of treatments. And so what patients were doing is going to see what they considered was an expert, but really they're only an expert in what they offered. And it would be a biased view. A lot of these integrative clinics would give a biased view based on the treatments they did. and they weren't getting a real complete picture of what was available. And then what would happen is they'd start the treatment. Sometimes it would work, but then after a while, resistance would kick in, pretty much fundamentally. And then they'd be sitting there with that doctor, having utilized all the treatments, and in some cases, the doctor would carry on, but in vain. And then the other patients would travel to another doctor and start another treatment, until, in many cases, people were out of money or energy. And then quite often people were progressing after they stopped treatments, or particularly if there was no standard of care left. So with this knowledge, I realized there was a need for a single, more from my data point of view, for collecting data, and also from my own personal needs as a patient, is that I had collected through this exercise all of the protocols, pretty much, of the top doctors in the world, including what drugs they were doing, where they were sourcing it. I managed to get the costs. And because of this resistance issue and this bias issue, to me, that there was a need for a clinic that would have all these options available and that would give an unbiased view of what treatments we're offering. And as the test that was done would sort of suggest what was useful, you'd move on to that treatment. And as resistance came, you'd move on to another treatment. So I had this powerful information, and I went looking for doctors around the world that would work with me, where I basically give them this information. And then I failed for the first few, and then I found a doctor in Spain that would work with me. And the idea is we bring everything into one place. So it's literally over the last 2 years we've been working. We're trying to find everything we can in one place, from every type of cancer vaccine we can find, neoantigen vaccines, autologous vaccines, intratumoral injections, Coley's toxins, every IV we can find, every cell therapy we can find, every off-label drug we can find, every polarization strategy for the microenvironment, conventional strategies, stem cell treatment. So anything you hear about, we're trying to pull into this clinic, including the psychospiritual stuff like psilocybin therapy for death anxiety. And then we've been running that for 2 years, and the concept is, one is it gives patients a lot to offer. It's at a relatively low cost to other clinics, because what we were noticing some of the clinics were doing is, because they had a limited range of treatments, they would put a huge markup, in some cases 500%. And because there was more to offer, the markup could be less and the patient would stay longer, they'd be under treatment. So the concept we came up with. We also realized testing was important, so we try to get hold of every single test you could possibly do in the world. So sensitivity to chemo, targeted therapy, cannabis oil, off-label drugs, supplements, keto, radiation, heat, immune system analysis, checkpoint analysis, microenvironment analysis, response to CAR-T or oncolytic viruses, terrain testing, and also, which was quite unique in this approach, we tested the blood almost daily. And what they gave us is an immense amount of data. So as we were doing treatments, we could see whether they were responding almost immediately. We could spot side effects almost immediately, and we can see resistance almost immediately. So it's almost like a concept that we created. It's been running 18 months now. Through the research, we kind of came to the conclusion, through picking up all these different doctors' ideas, that actually what we were doing is, in the integrative world now, it's pretty much all going to immunotherapy. If you follow 90% of the integrative doctors, they're doing immunotherapy approaches. And what really everyone's trying to do is make the tumor responsive to the immune system. Well, it's commonly called turning it from cold to hot. And this, if you go and see a conventional doctor, he'll say, oh, your cancer doesn't respond to immunotherapy, but really they're only talking about the drugs in circulation, which are PD-L1, PD-1, CTLA-4, and if you're in the US, LAG-3. So when the conventional oncologists are saying there's no immunotherapy for your cancer, they're really just saying, with the drugs that are in standard of care. They're not looking at the microbiome, hypoxia, glycolysis, lactate. They're not looking at antigen presentation and stimulating the immune system, so it's got immune memory. They're not looking at ensuring the cancer is exposing antigens for the immune system to see it. There's a whole host of things that you can look at to get the immune system to respond. And what we do is basically research mechanisms to work around this circle, and we're finding new things as well. So is it working? Not always. The first patient we had came in 18 months ago. He was given up by standard of care. His markers were on the rise, and his cancer's still there. He's very late stage, a 10-centimeter lung tumor, probably about 20 other lung tumors, 2 10-centimeter tumors in the rib and the leg. And we kept him fairly stable over a year and a half. We've had other successes, like a 10-centimeter breast tumor disappearing after 2 intratumoral injections and 1 round of chemo, a single dose. And then, you know, it's because we've got so many different things we can use. We're learning things that we would never even expect to learn. So we had this case. We think it was hyperprogression. So this was someone who was doing started checkpoints and was kind of stable. And this is sort of something we see a lot. They're stable until they got they had a bad scan, a scan that surprised them, and literally their tumor markers started taking off. And then we couldn't control it. And then we found a study about EMT and its relation to hyperprogression. And we used an EMT inhibitor and got a huge response, and over 1,000 drop in CA19-9 literally in a week. So we're learning kind of, because we've got so many different options to use in a less regulated environment. I know this is hard to kind of mimic in the States. We're learning not just, you know, what's working, but these very niche sort of situations that aren't even studied very well in research. And then, yeah, some other interesting things. We've had a BRAF positive colorectal, had a complete response on PET, personalized cancer vaccines. We're building a sort of standard approach, which is cancer vaccines, intratumoral injections, the typical anti-cancer IVs, another ovarian complete response. And these are cancers that shouldn't respond to immunotherapy. They're the ones that, you know, that didn't pass the typical trials. And then with the testing, we're also kind of, we're also sort of learning that you can really pinpoint what immunotherapy you need with adequate testing. So this was a rectal tumor. She had 2 tumors in the rectal passage, 2 in the liver, and multiple lung mets. We did 1 intratumoral injection in the liver, and she'd had a small response, but at the same time we took a biopsy and did a checkpoint analysis, and she came up with LAG3 overexpressed, only LAG3, kind of interestingly. And then we went back in and did another intratumoral with LAG3 and systemic, and her liver and lung mets cleared on PET scan. So other findings we found is that in terms of this study, and this will be shortly the end, it didn't always work. So you know, with all these things, when you see these clinics, they always show off the successes. It doesn't always work. In terms of we do analysis on what doesn't work, you know, and pretty much we can find reasons why things don't work. All of our approaches typically use immunotherapy, and if someone was on steroids or opiates, we couldn't get the immune system to work. So it's kind of pointless going down that route. Almost every patient we've had in the clinic has had damage through chemo. And that's a finding I don't think is talked about enough in the patient community, particularly in the cancers that get very high dose chemo, is how damaged the patients do get towards the end. You know, and a lot of people kind of put a lot of hope on moving to one of these clinics at the end when all options run out. But if you look at the studies, now this is a study that was done on intratumoral injections of cell therapies. Those with no prior chemo had 3 times better response than those with chemo. So and I think there's an education that we're trying to give, is that what people, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people can't afford these things. This is for people who do have money, and I don't recommend anyone spends money they don't have. But if you are going to consider doing it, you really want to be considering it early on in the treatment plan. We also saw patterns. Those that stay in the clinic longer did better, just kind of self-evidence. What we also unfortunately found is that we've not had that much success particularly in some of the more aggressive cancers, in stopping the cancer altogether. Typically, people are needing to stay on treatments indefinitely. and I see this a lot from my studies, is that there's a hope that you can go to these experimental clinics and they lead to kind of a long-term remission, but we're just not seeing that in a huge amount. But there are like strands, there are people sort of capturing data, and it's something I'm investigating in this natural healing approach, which I think is probably, in the prostate cancer world, because of the slow growing nature of it, I think you guys probably, through your analysis in these forums, have a window into how people can help heal themselves naturally, which I think needs to be kind of like a big area of research for everyone. And then we've seen this, and I want to bring this up. We've seen this in the clinic very clearly. Is that if the emotional state of the patient is not good, then the immunotherapy doesn't work. And then we found studies to back that up as well. It's not just the cortisol impact that people talk about, but actually under stress, the whole immune system engineers itself in a pro-tumor fashion. So when you're looking at the immune system of the cancer, there are certain tumor cells like Tregs and tumor-associated macrophages that under stressful conditions upregulate, and you get more of these cells to stop the immune system going in. So the psychological aspect of this route is really important. So just to finish off, in terms of where we're going, like as an organization, what we hope to do is really solve an increasing problem we see with patients, is that there's this, now we've got this world and these forums, a lot of people are now at a new level of stress, which is, what should I do? And given the data we're looking at, there's so many options. We're setting ourselves up to be able to answer under what situation is the best treatment to get, and how much it will cost, whether it's worth spending money, is it worth traveling for? And then with this data, we're also looking for charities, patients, and clinics to work with and share this data. We're in the process of writing a book, as I've got a partner, Gabriele, and we've got a book coming out next year, which will summarize all our findings. So that's it. It's probably went over my 5 minutes, so I do apologize, but I'll leave you to ask some questions.
Great. So if everyone could use the raise hand feature, and I'll call on the people as they come up. I have a number of questions, Mark. There's so much parallel with what our thinking is and our approach. I'm very impressed. Just wanted to how does it work that you attracted patients and captured data from those patients? How did that all work? Because you cited it, because as you know, there's a medical academic approach to doing that, and I suspect you just were sensible and not following all the protocols of what's sort of medical science asks. So can you just how did you attract people? How did you capture data, like the data you shared? And then how did you draw your conclusions?
Yeah, I mean, I sought legal opinion at the start, and we weren't an organization at all while we did it. It was just run as a group of people, and we basically did it literally on Google Sheets, and we said to people, this is yours to own. It's up to you whether you share it with us. So that's how we got around with it. So in terms of the technicalities, we weren't a forum, we were a group. There are other groups. There was a prostate cancer study done, I think, by a few guys. I don't know whether the guys are on here, but there was a similar study. There's lots of groups actually popping up around the world looking at data. And our approach was, this is your document to capture. We built a tool which gave them, if they put in their supplement, it would tell you which pathways it would address. We let them track their blood. So we had a tool that they could use and get power from. So that's how we handled the kind of legalities. But in terms of the actual capturing of the data, that was difficult. And I met with there was a charity in the US that tried to do the same. And as you're probably all aware, it's such a dynamic process, and having cancer is such a busy business. Most people don't have the time to go in every week and change the fact that they've stopped doing, curcumin this week, or stop this off label because they've had a side effect, or they've been taken off this chemo. So there were some patients that were pretty engaged, and we had regular cash-ups and gave the data. For a lot of the others, after about a year into the study, it became very predictable how people would do based on what high-level strategy they would take. So we weren't definitely, it was very dirty data. We definitely weren't capturing all the data. But given it's, typically a very much a one-way, ugly strand sort of road for pancreatic patients, okay, so what you're really looking for is the exceptional responders, those that lasted, say, 3 years plus. So, and then you could really easily distinguish those that, were in that category. So, and there were very, very clear patterns. It was very sort of, it was very predictable towards the end, kind of knowing how well people would do. And in terms of like, did they start integrative medicine early? Did they see a clinic early? Are they determined? It's become easy for me, even working in a clinic, to establish if a patient's determined or not. The people that do really well, they're people like this that turn on calls like this, who really research. 90% are not like that, and if you see a patient going, I'm not sure about that, I don't want to do, giving a reason, that sort of shows the sign that determination is not there. And then the psychology was another aspect you can clearly see, and lots of integrative oncologists talk about it, in that, those that come across and manage to get over the psychological difficulties to sort of remain positive through this process do much better.
Thank you. Your question. That's great. So just to play that back to you, is basically observational and interpretation, and you just kind of saw what worked. And yeah, and that there, if you were going for academic standards, they might say, where's your control? And they might say, where's your data? And so on. But you're kind of just seeing what works. You're kind of more like what I used to do in business, which is best practices. Like, this seems to be working for these people for these reasons. This is what I see.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah, and then I came to, I started off at the beginning being quite pernickety, because I wanted the data to medical standards, but it was just tough getting patients to update it, and it was time consuming. We were constantly having to do calls and then as things went on, we started learning, okay, this person's, and then we had dialogue. So we knew the ones going to clinics, we knew what they were doing, we knew the approaches they were following. So, and then, with Pancreatic, it's just such an aggressive disease. It's very also easy to establish who the exceptional responders are, which is slightly different to prostate.
Right. Okay.
And then just to add in that one more thing as well, and then you get those that have run out of all options. And then you're like, the control is there's no way back, right? You've been said goodbye to standard of care. And increasingly, we're seeing pretty good responses in experimental meds that is stuff that is totally novel and new.
Right. Okay, Saeed, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that shows, I believe, a very good presentation, the importance of the personalized and precision medicine. And when we call it precision or personalized, means we should move off the idea of the control and treatment group and focus to each patient. And that's the one reason, really, the idea of placebo really doesn't work, and we need to change that idea. Okay, my question is, what was your top 3 symptoms before you have a pancreatic cancer?
It's quite, well, I was in and I see this a lot when I meet patients. There's quite a lot of people I see who've gone through quite an extreme burnout that get cancer. So the burnout was, stomach pains were the first, but the burnout.
Which area of is it epigastric?
Oh, the stomach. Oh, okay. On the tail and the ascenate. So there's a like near the head. So two lesions that were identified on EUS. One in the tail, and I don't know if you know and one in the head. I had pains there, and in other parts of my stomach. So like mild sort of pains. But leading up to that, I had a panic attack. So I one evening called an ambulance thinking I was going to die, and it was panic attacks. That was the kind of the burnout. I spent a week in hospital. For about 6 months, my nervous system, for 6 months, my nervous system was totally out of whack. I went from being, someone who traveled the world and lived in Hong Kong and New York and Sao Paulo, and I'd get my bags up and go, to being someone who couldn't go into a restaurant without having anxiety. I couldn't do conference calls with my team. So my nervous system was just totally gone. That was part of it. Symptoms, pain in the locations. I'm trying to think what else. I had periods of like, but it was probably stress related as well, like acid in acid reflux. I think that was about. And dodgy stool as well.
Right. Thank you. By the way, I'm going to share a link to a video I recently watched on YouTube. I strongly suggest everybody with cancer to watch at least the last 5 minutes of that video, because it might change the outcome of your treatment. Anyway, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Saeed. Well, was it TU did you say? You'll put it in the chat? Okay.
Sorry, a video link.
Okay.
I'm going to put a video link on the chat.
Video. Okay, great. Okay, next up is Brian.
Hi, Mark. Great presentation. And I love how you've approached this, both with yourself and the patients that you're serving. There was a slide that you showed regarding all of the different tests that some patients go through, everything from proteome to microbiome, et cetera. You use a lot of liquid biopsies as well, and very focused on linking those diagnostics to immunotherapy. And I'm curious if you saw more value from certain types of diagnostics versus those that really didn't provide much insight.
Yeah, it's a good question. Where we've settled, I think there are two leaders in the space at the moment, quite clear, that stand out for me, which is NextGen Oncology and Boston Gene. So NextGen's based in Germany. Both have followed similar approaches where they're looking at a huge amount of detail specifically around the immune system. NextGen Oncology, their approach has been, it's a fascinating, and it's a no-brainer when you're in this space. There's so much research out there. If you look, once you start knowing where to look for research, it almost goes on forever. If you want to find if you get into cancer research and you start trying to look for something, you can go down a rabbit hole on microbiome, on metabolism. You can like cancer, chemo resistance. You can find the information out there. And what NextGen have done is they look at all the genes in the cancer, all the expression, and then they do a correlation and also the microenvironment, so all the immune cells and the immune cell interaction with the cancer. So they're looking for checkpoints. So looking at kind of everything that may be useful, and literally their report changes every month. So it's like they're doing real-time research into what you can do based on the research that's coming out all the time. So, which is, the most sensible. This is the problem. What's happening now in this space is medical knowledge is meant to be doubling every 3 months. So if you stand still for 3 months, you're behind a long way. This whole thing needs to be real time. The practicalities around that in the real world. But if you want the best results, that's what you need. And I think, NextGen Oncology seem to be going in that space. And I think Boston Gene is probably the next best I see. So that's in the immune system specifically, if it's an immune system. If it's, say, sensitivity testing, you've got data, RGCC, NextGen, main track. I know people who've looked into the science behind them all. And I think actually the scientists that really understand it will say the answer always depends. Because, for example, like RGCC use stem cells for their sensitivity testing, or they use stem cell markers as a filter on their blood draw. So you're getting a stem cell look. Nagajourney is using it takes the whole biopsy and uses the microenvironment around it to look at his chemosensitivity. Data are meant to have a very advanced way of growing their tumors. So I don't know whether that's answered your question. So immunotherapy, it's NextGen Boston Gene, and then for the sensitivity tests, I'd say it depends.
Yeah. So, Boston Gene does a tumor, just a basic tumor report, which is gives some insight in terms of the tumor microenvironment. But they also have a spatial phenotyping product as well. Is that what you're talking about, or are you just talking about their standard tumor report?
It's standard tumor report. I mean, they're looking at checkpoints. They're looking at microenvironment. I haven't seen the other one, so I need to look at that.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay,
again, so that doesn't discount the need to do, say, the standard mutational testing, which comes, from Guardian or Foundation One, where that's a given, and typically it gets given in standard of care as well. And then I think the obvious solution on that is, if you can afford it, you want the 500 druggable genes tested.
Yep.
If you're getting any less than that, you're being shortchanged and taking a bit of risk.
Yep. Which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Just a quick plug. We're going to have Boston Gene on a similar webinar in 1 week. They're going to be presenting their testing. And then also in November 1, one of their scientists is going to be talking about their bioinformatics. So that's upcoming. And we did have a session with RGCC. For those who don't recall, you can check. It's in the archives. Next up is Amit.
Hey, Mark. A great topic and great presentation. I mean, you pinpointed the problem so well that people looking into integrative stuff just find pieces of information, and just the fatigue sets in of how many things can you chase and how many things you can do, right? And like you're saying, the medical information is doubling every 3 months. So most clinics and people get limited by time and money that they can spend on this on the provider side as well. I mean, how are you able to do this? Both from a intellectual resources perspective as well as capital and money perspective, to be able to put together your clinic, because it's not a trivial task to integrate so much knowledge, information, and be able to provide all of these treatments for all different types of cancer. So it's quite amazing, and I'm just kind of curious as to what is the size of your team, researchers, and how are you able to solve the problem that everybody faces?
Okay, good questions. So, okay, my personal story. I mean, I had a 25-year background in finance, working in Hong Kong, a low tax regime, and managing $100 million projects, and so I made investments in property that went well. So personally, I said to myself along that journey, I was not far from being able to retire. That at the start, I was nervous spending like $300-400 on an IVC treatment. I was like, when you're used to getting like everything for free. And then my markers kept rising, unfortunately, without treatments. And I kept going back for more and kept going back. And it was when I got to about $200,000, actually, I just said, the only way I can deal with this personal impact on myself is making this for other people as well. So I kind of set and it sounds crazy, but I've got an element of autism, and I realized that to stay alive, I needed to solve this problem for myself, financially, and having a clinic that would be there for me. And that was part of the kind of motivation to find a clinic that would kind of come and do this at a relatively low cost. So that was part of it, and I had very low volume disease. It's not like so that's my. But now, luckily, and I think I didn't get a chance to talk about it because of the kind of observations I've had of the natural healing. That's been my focus for the last 2 years, is what people. So I've done a fecal microbiome transplant. I've done so much trauma therapy that I don't feel anything like I feel like a different person. And I now live in a field in a yurt, and I used to live in a city. So totally transformed my life as well to get there. And now my markers are stable without treatments. So it's going to be a long journey of just throwing money at the problem, working through the research, doing everything I can, and then natural healing. And I think that's the approach that I'm coming to view as the right approach for everyone. Throw everything at it at the start, use standard of care as best you can, And then during that, do all your emotional work, get your body kind of in a healing state, remove all your stress triggers. Because we know now with the science that there seems to be a way that the body can heal itself. And that's so. And in terms of the resourcing, I relied on volunteers at the start. So I got sporadic volunteers, people helping for say 1 year. Someone helped with a spreadsheet development. I've got a really good researcher, Gabriele Gavazzi. He's in a lot of the forums. He's developed the Rainbow Protocol. So and it's kind of weird because we came up with this concept with a clinic where the research needed to be real time, and I worked with a doctor. And after a while, my bandwidth became constrained, and I needed someone else to do the research for me. So in order to get real time, data coming into the doctor, you almost need a team doing it. And that's a service we're planning to offer out. And it's complex. It's once you find a new treatment that's working in a clinical trial, what are the side effects, what the dosing, what the interactions, where do you buy the drug? So yeah, that's what I meant. But it is a small team. There's been about 4 of us, Julie, Ryan, Gabrielle, myself in the bulk of it.
Okay. Thanks. Just a few follow-up questions. So from all the clinics that you have studied and protocols you have studied, have you published kind of your take of the best options and opportunities, or the priority list of where people should look or start?
I used to, but then I realized it's way more complicated than just a generic response. It depends where the tumor is. It depends where you are in diagnosis, what side effects you've got, whether you've got chemo resistance. There's some sort of thought processes like this, right? So does the drug get into the blood-brain barrier if it's in the brain? Have you had chemo and got resistance, and therefore it's pointless going to a low-dose metronomic chemo place because you've already got resistance? How is your immune system? If your immune system's tanked, immunotherapy may not work for you. So there's a lot of detail. So I've steered away from doing that. I do consults now. I just would say, if it's prostate cancer, that this specific is your cancer prostate?
Yeah.
The Dr. Onik, I don't know if you know of Dr. Onik.
No.
You look up his study. He had a crazy, it was only his own retrospective analysis. He's an intratumoral doctor from Florida, but more than 50% complete response to metastatic prostate cancer. Intratumoral injections with cryoablation. So that's like on one end of if you've got prostate cancer or metastatic, he's amazing results. And he is a prostate cancer survivor himself. And he invented the IRE. He's a super genius guy. So that's at one end, but it's expensive. I'll write. I can find the study if you want as well.
Okay.
And then at the other end, natural healing for prostate. My father's got prostate cancer. There's a lot of people out there with prostate cancer, and there's so many people at the early stage. You can manage it with natural healing, and I do think it's one of the cancers that modified citrus pectin, melatonin, things like that. Doing exercise, mastering the emotions. So I think if it was at the early stage, I'd be veering more to stuff like that.
Okay. Just one other quick thing. Have you looked into Ayurvedic treatments, which are kind of common natural treatments in India, and energy healing?
Yes, me personally. So that's my new area. My third study is in this, and I've done. I'm a lab rat, so I've kind of done as many things as I can do, whether it's like medically or now more recently. So I've seen a multitude of energy healers. I haven't specifically done an Ayurvedic, but I believe in it. It's similar to Chinese medicine. It's on the softer end. I think whether it works or not at a late stage cancer patient, for pancreatic, I don't think it's going to be enough. It's going to help once you've got the tumor burden down. Increasingly the emotional state now has become very clear. And when you go into a lot of energy, if you study energy healing, which I have, and I've talked to shamans from the Brazilian rainforest to do ayahuasca, and there was a therapist who came to the place I'm staying here from Germany, and she's a PhD researcher, clinical psychologist. She's working on the MAPS clinical trial for MDMA. and she studies shamanism. And she treats patients. And I said, like, I said to her, how do you bring the shamanism into your client base as a clinical psychologist? And she said she can't for ethical reasons unless they ask her, because it's conventional. And then I said, do you get better results when you bring shamanism to the work you do? And she says, by a long way. And that's like from a very, so I think that world is it's something I'm researching, but I think there is stuff there. And I throw myself in Mexico, Costa Rica, Portugal, Spain. I go and seek out these people and try and learn what they do as well at the other end. And I'm continue to be fascinated by what they tell me.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeff.
Appreciate it.
Jeff Krolik.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for your presentation. It, in my small personal way, this is what I found too, is that there are dozens and dozens of like 1% improvement interventions. They can be hard to measure, but in aggregate, at the right time, the right combination, they can make a significant impact on your cancer, on your mood. So, and I'm also interested in energetic healing. And I think I saw in a short blurb about your background that you had also done some work with Rife treatment.
Yeah.
And I don't always reveal all these things that I'm doing, but I actually have a Rife device that I use periodically. Haven't actually found it particularly effective, but I think it's interesting to explore these things. And when a test lines up with starting a new supplement or a new practice, and that you suddenly see your PSA either start to go down or it stops going up. And by the way, I'm doing a protocol, starting and stopping one particular hormone therapy based on how fast, and adaptive therapy. But there are periods when I'm not doing that, and I have found, for instance, going to a Buddhist retreat several times and taking my PSA, I get a weekly PSA, and seeing that the PSA actually went down a little bit where it had never ever done that before.
I've had the same, yeah.
So I think these are, or just accidentally discovering that a Tibetan physician, here's herbs you should do in the morning, afternoon, and as my PSA was going up, waiting for, starting the hormone therapy, for about 3 weeks, it just leveled off, which was that had never happened before. It always went up in a certain progression. So these are all very interesting responses that we can get. But again, it's very hard without very sophisticated testing to really know what's going on. It's more, for me, it's okay, your PSA went up or it didn't go up and I started and stopped this. But I do try to track all of those things without driving myself crazy with all of the details. So anyway, I just wanted to second that. I think this approach of many different interventions that can have a small benefit and maybe a large benefit in overall.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think that's a fascinating finding. I normally kind of keep this to myself, but given you've said it, I've done so many therapies around trauma healing in my own body that what I found is I used to be totally disassociated, totally in my mind. And I think that was one of the problems that led to my diagnosis, is that I was a mind person, trapped in my mind. And then through doing trauma therapy, I moved into my body. I can now sense my body to the point. And I started, as I was doing trauma releases, and I've done a lot of therapy in that guy, I was like unleashing heaviness in the body that allowed me to go into the body. but I've done so much of it now. I believe now I can sense what the Chinese medicine doctors and people talk about in terms of energy blockages. So I can actually bring my awareness to parts of my body, to my pancreas, for example, and feel like a discordance in the energy around certain areas of my body. And by leaving awareness there, as you do in body scanning meditation, the discordance decreases. So it's my perception is, if you do the Vipassana meditation, for example, which is body scanning, what that's doing is the awareness is part of the healing process. And if you speak to a lot of exceptional responders, a lot of them will talk about the visualization. They'll say, "Oh, I sat there visualizing the immune cells coming to my cancer cell," and I sense that is a process that is going on from my latest research.
Yeah,
so
and that's been my experience too, with a particular meditation practice that is a Buddhist version of energy flowing and checking and sensing, all of those things, and visualization. So that's a whole other aspect, which, boy, it's really hard to pin down. But I've seen a couple of instances where my PSA, if that is the marker,
that data is valuable. That data is super valuable. That's if more and more people start doing the same and start seeing the same experience, then it's a big finding. And I think that's what's powerful about. I didn't think about this until this forum, because prostate's an area I don't come across too much, because it's one of the cancers that's kind of got a lot of options. But I do think it's an interesting test case for treatment protocols like that, because it's so slow going, and I think you'll see the impact quicker. Whereas if you've got multiple liver metastasis with pancreatic cancer, no amount of meditation is going to pull that back.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Yeah,
Mark, how are you set for time? We have a couple more questions, but we can.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, both Rick Stanton and I don't know, John Powers, I think, had questions. Rick, do you want to? You put some things in the chat. Did you want to voice those? You had a question about the vaccine and so on.
Yeah, these questions kind of went back in the half an hour ago, so it doesn't, maybe a little less pertinent. Thought I'd mention, love your talk, inspirational. You threw out some ideas, next gene, I believe, and
Oncology,
yeah, and just how, and you mentioned how you could characterize the immune state from their services, but I was curious how that immune state was defined, and I imagine RNA-seq would be the simplest. Do you have...
my understanding, I mean, the main bit of information, I mean, I mean, there's the microenvironment piece where they're just looking at cells within the biopsy. They're just looking for Treg cells or myeloid-derived suppressor cells or NK cells or cancer cells or fibroblasts. There's that analysis. So that can help us guide.
What's the nature of that analysis? Is it just through a microscope?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure the mechanisms they use for that.
Okay.
But then they use PCR, real-time PCR, it's possibly they use that for which is the most valuable piece of information, which is the interaction between the immune cells and the cancer cell, and which checkpoints are upregulated.
Okay. Anyway, that was just a curiosity. I thought you did a really good talk. With all these options, your circle of all the axes of intervention with checkpoints, and you mentioned I thought very nicely that if a doctor says you're not responsive to, you won't respond to immunotherapy, I think you did a great job in highlighting, well, that only means, PD-L1, CTLA-4, a small subset. So with all those options, and we're a patient, and I don't know which, well, it's like a dartboard or something. What option am I gonna pick from all that big circle? So there has to be some type of prediction of response. Like, this looks like you might, benefit from this axis. Is that something that your lab does?
Yeah, that's what Nick and Boston Gene do as well, right? So Boston Gene look at checkpoints, they look at the microenvironment as well. They give you a view in terms of what you can focus on. But we have patients there a long time, and they can't test too regularly because it's expensive. So actually, what we end up typically doing is, we'll have a very strong focus on what needs to be done at the start, and then at a later date, we'll sort of cycle off-label drugs or supplements or low-dose chemos to ensure everything's kept in check without continually testing. So sometimes it's just easier to defend against it coming as opposed to testing to see whether you need to defend against it. Now, but I'd say that, if you look at the studies, there's a few things that need to happen for an immune response. One is you need a recognition, right? So the cancer needs to be identified by the immune system. And aside for mismatch repair deficiency cancers, where there's so many mutations, the mutational burden's high, the immune system can see it, then cancer vaccines are the way to deal with that. So, and again, if you look at the studies, the best science available at the moment is the neoantigen vaccines. They're a little bit expensive and they take some time. And then there's some less effective vaccines you can do as well. So then you get the immune recognition. You need to make sure, then there's a process to make the immune system see it in terms of using adjuvants and toll-like receptors. And then you've got ensuring the antigens you've trained by your immune system are visible on the tumor cell. That's a mandatory MSC class. So you need drugs to address that. And then checkpoints. And then checkpoints, so I would say, are mandatory.
Do you have a
So
favorite?
the key ones.
Do you have a favorite vendor that would create a vaccine?
Yeah, in Next Gen Oncology do their own neoantigen vaccine. Partly because it's cheaper than everywhere else. It's the one we use. We don't have enough data yet to see. I mean, because I speak to a lot of people who do a lot of the vaccines, my hunch is they're all similar. I think people focus too much on the vaccine. I think more focus needs to be on the other things around the vaccine.
That's not my experience. The ability to define the peptide sequence seems to be variable, and I've had several peptide vaccines identified for me I used to be in bioinformatics from some of my pals, and it's variable. So, I mean, that was 2 years ago, so not too long ago. How much? It was 80,000 roughly. Is Boston Gene come down a bit?
Yeah, they're all, I mean, in the US it's expensive. They're all around 100,000, I thought. I don't know if they've brought their price down, but in Europe it's cheaper, 25,000 euros starting price.
Thank you. I'm very appreciative of you. Thanks for your time here.
No worries.
Thanks, Rick. Amit?
Mark, you said that you do consults. What's the best way to reach you for the consult?
Via my patient-led oncology, it's on the slide, or I can send it through him.
Okay, I appreciate if you can share the contact information. Thank you.
I can do that too. And I have a related quick question, Mark. When someone goes to your clinic in Spain, and then you said they're monitoring almost daily the side effects and everything. We've heard something similar. Another super patient like yourself, Ricardo Salgado, went to a doctor in Houston where basically they were monitored, and any side effects they could call on a specialist. If it was kidney, liver, whatever it was, they could get them right in and get those side effects dealt with. How long? And he was at it and they were personalized the dosing of his drugs and combinations and everything else. So it's very concierge, very intense. And it's like having a whole hospital just for you. Very expensive. And I think he did it for a couple months. He just moved to Houston for a couple months. How long when you said a long period, what is a long period for the patients that go to your clinic?
Well, typically in our clinic, they're quite late stage. So, I mean, the first patient, for example, was like riddled, we're talking 3 or 4 kilograms of cancer. And we've knocked some back, but it's still there, but we've kept him going 18 months and he looks healthier than I am. So, I mean, we've got other patients who had a recurrence, had surgery, and now just defending, and so, but I would say, I mean, it depends on the aggressiveness of the cancer, depends on the state of the patient, but if I think about the approach that we're kind of settling on a little bit, which would be definitely a biopsy for testing if we can do it, an intratumoral injection while we biopsy if we can. We'd go and get a neoantigen vaccine made, which will take 3 months. In the interim, if they can afford it, let's assume that we can do a tumor-associated antigen, which is basically just circulating tumor cells grown, mashed up and made as a vaccine. It's not as good as a neoantigen, but we get actually very good results with that. And then we give that regularly over 3 months. Once we get the checkpoint analysis, we give that. We might do cell therapies if they can afford it. That takes 6 weeks to make, and then it'll be 4 weeks. So let's say, like, it's complicated. So it's 3 months of like attacking it, I would say, but then you've got the neoantigen vaccine at the end, and hopefully by 3 months you've got everything down. But the neoantigen vaccine's taken over 12 months, so it'll come in start every week, and then every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. So they'll tailor off. That's typically the approach we follow. And I'd say if you're late stage, you've really got to 3 months is a good amount of time. I mean, if you're just starting your treatment, you can go, like, you haven't done any standard of care therapy, you can come for a month and get the tests and start knocking things back, and then move on to standard of care. That's one approach. But we typically get, unfortunately, the people who run out of all options, and they're damaged, and their hemoglobin's low, and their white blood cells are low, and it's a bit of a battle.
Thank you. Jay, you had a question? Comment?
Yeah, as a pancreatic cancer patient, I'm a little bit in awe of, or well, actually make that a lot of awe in your ability to put all this together. I know a lot of pancreatic cancer patients, and I don't think one of them would have the ability to accomplish what you did. So my hats are off to you. I got a couple of questions, if I could. The first is about how many people in the population that you studied, how many people are your results based on?
So the initial study was 100 for the PanCan study. And then since the clinic study, I would say I don't keep track. It's more casual. So what was happening until recently is while I did the study, what I would do is someone would come to me telling me they were going to a clinic. We would have a chat at understanding their situation. I would tell them some information for free, and then I would track them. And then over time, I had more feedback from patients, and I was getting it for free. So just this circular view, and I'd probably say somewhere between 200 and 300 people in that process.
Yeah, that's quite a bit. And for me, I'm interested in the timing of this. You say that most people come more or less as a last resort. And that's after standard of care. So if someone came to you in the beginning, would this be in addition to standard of care, or or is it before standard of care?
I mean, I never make advice. I never give advice. I tell people, what I've seen, and it would be depending on the cancer. So I would say, for pancreatic, it's quite clear from the study that, I saw it's very rare to get to no evidence of disease on a scan or tumor markers with pancreatic. It's very rare. So I just say, look, from what I've seen, those going to the clinics have a good clinic, have a very good chance of getting to NED. But does that can be done in many ways. Most people can't afford to go to a clinic and get dedicated treatments. And typically what they'll get is, metronomic doses of chemo with some testing and some immunotherapy, with lots of IVs and hypothermia and hyperbaric oxygen. I'll get that. But it's also valid to say, I haven't got that money. I'm going to do FOLFIRINOX, and I just want IV vitamin C and curcumin and hypothermia, and I'll do it concurrently with some off-label drugs. I think everything's budget dependent partly, and hassle dependent. A lot of people have kids and can't afford to get up and fly somewhere, so they need to think of a solution at home. I don't know if that answers it. It's always complex when I.
Yeah. Well, cancer is complex. Cancer is complex.
Yes. I mean, I also play a game of if it was me, and then I play a game of, if you tell me your budget, I'll give you an answer based on that budget if it was me, or I can give an answer and say, if I had unlimited money, this is what I would do.
Yeah, I like your concept of stacking therapies on top of each other to get in pancreatic cancer. Getting a 1% advantage is huge.
Yes.
Is huge. So stacking some up together has meaning. And my last question is, you just referenced 3 months in a clinic. What would something like that run?
It's also a very difficult question. I mean, I can talk. There's lots of different clinics, but I mean, it obviously depends what you do. I mean, the concept we try to come up with an ethic. I mean, with the clinic I'm working, we're trying to come up with an ethical model, and we're just getting started. So the model we came up with 30% cost price on meds, so that there was no motive from the doctor to suggest one or the other for cost reasons, and then 500 euros, 495 euros a day in the clinic. So it's not cheap, and it adds up. So you typically, depending on the stage, if it was you're only doing treatment in the clinic, and you've got multiple liver mets, you're talking easily between 50 and 100,000. If it's like you've got a single liver met, you might just get away with 2 intratumoral injections, and that would be less than 30,000. So it's always the answer is it depends. But unfortunately, and this is a horrible finding that we've come to, is money is becoming a very strong factor in outcomes. And now that's, I thought I was doing good for the world, and then you look at the situation and you go, possibly not far off a situation where money is going to be a deciding factor. And that's why I think with this work that we're all doing, what we really need to do is reach out to the charities that can maybe fund these clinical trials, and somehow get them to sort of fund these trials into standard of care. I think that's the only kind of way of ethically using this data for all. But it's a lot of money, as we know, to run clinical trials.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Joan Powers, did you have a last question?
Yeah, it's not even so much a question as comments, and it's interesting because with all the other questions, Mark came right back to a big part of my appreciation for what this group does in general, which is it really has become, you need to have the resources to do this kind of work on your own. It's not reaching the masses. And Mark, I don't know how much you've talked to Brad before this, but it seems like everyone in here, myself included, has gotten into the cancer space coming out of the business world and kind of shocked by what doesn't exist instead of what exists. I just look at this and I can't thank enough because this was a great presentation. I think your approach was great because you came at it from all different areas. And when I hear you were making a comment to something where you're saying, well, it wasn't up to medical standards. It's clear from this group and a lot of other folks I see, it's really not up to business standards, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's my frustration with this whole thing is there really is not a there really are not standards that or requirements where you've got here's the standard, you got to meet this standard. There's too many different options. And I like that you haven't looked at conventional medicine, you haven't looked at molecular medicine, you've looked across the full spectrum like this. And that's what I think Brad and Rick and Brian have really done in this group is bringing in all sorts of views and inputs because it becomes a personal journey. And fortunately, you were strong enough to do this on your own. And I haven't been on this call in a while, but you get on here and you can see on people's faces the strain from their own personal journeys, how hard it is. And people will lose months trying to do this when they're the ones with cancer. So this was great. I really thank you. And I'm glad you had the fortitude to really drive through and be so open-minded because it's every bit of this helps. And that's the only way we're ever going to get it to where it's, it can really become beneficial to people without the resources.
Yeah.
And this was really good. And this whole team in here, there's so many similar stories. A lot of what you said resonates with everyone on here.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you because I think you hit on some great stuff.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think Amit is gonna follow up with you, and I'm gonna Amit and I are pals. So I'm gonna be, hey, how's it going? You know, because and I think, you know, we're all pals. And Amita, thank you for you know, showing some interest. And Mark, thank you for sharing. You know, John mentioned, you know, your insight. Well, thank you for sharing as well. So anyway.
Thanks.
Yeah. Brian, you're last, and then I'll stop the recording. Go
Okay.
Brian.
Okay, I'll be really quick. I heard about intratumoral injections from a pancreatic patient who we just onboarded last week, and he so far has had a complete remission. And I know that it supposedly does work in prostate cancer. I just wanted you to clarify because prostate cancer patients, like many cancer patients, have multiple lesions. And so if you're using an intratumoral vaccine, that it not only will kill that tumor that you're injecting, but also other tumors. Is that accurate?
So it's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked because if it's recorded, I can get it to the world. So the wish from all the doctors doing it is that that's the case, and they're all trying to build science to do it, but it's rare. So I mean, bar the prostate cancer study that I think's just been posted, you know, Dr. Onik, and he's a genius, and it's definitely worth watching his videos. We copy a lot of his ideas. What he does is, you know, you simultaneously with the intratumoral injection train a number of immune cells. And then what he does is he grows them by the billions in your own body by inserting GM-CSF on a daily basis. So you end up with 20 billion. So you go from sort of 3 million immune cells to 3 billion to 20 billion within the body by him manipulating the growth with growth factors over a month. So what he's doing is training a small number and then growing them like crazy. So you've got this small, you start off with a small army, and then by the end, you've got an army that just going everywhere. So that's the idea that they're kind of trying to do.
And for him to figure out what those immune cell, you know, concoction is he using like the BG report or
yeah, he uses next gen, and the report I talked about. He uses
the next gen oncology.
Yeah, but I don't think he uses it. You know, because it's interesting because the thing with, you know, because you have to do the biopsy, and you may as well use the attempt at biopsy to do the intratumoral injection. So quite often he doesn't use it, and I think people have got mixed views as to, because there's actually only three 3 or 4, depending on how you checkpoint in the market, unless you can get experimental checkpoints. So one strategy I think he's moved to is just inject them all and see what happens, and hope you've got them. And I think, you know, people like focus on, you know, which doctor's getting the results. Looking at the tests, I think it's luck a lot of the time. If the checkpoints that are overexpressed are not druggable with conventional meds, you're a checkmate.
Yeah.
So the testing is useful to know if, you know, okay, I didn't respond because of XYZ.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I talked to one pancreatic patient who went down to Mexico. I can't remember the name of the doctor, and he used 11. Yeah, there you go. 11, I think like 11 checkpoints or something like that. And he just did them all simultaneously.
Yeah. So that, you know, that circle I showed, in those 11 drugs, actually 80% of them are doing other things, not just checkpoints. So it's most of them are using, you know, 10 drugs at once. They're trying to hack that circle.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you.
All right.